If you've been trying to live in the end and you keep failing at it, this video is going to change that for you because the way most people are taught to live in the end is way too vague. It sounds great in theory. Just be the person who already has it is mostly what it sounds like. Just feel the wish fulfilled. Just live as if it's already done. But what does that actually mean moment to moment in your real life? When you're brushing your teeth, when you're driving to work, when you're scrolling your phone, when you're talking to a friend, most people don't actually know. And so they end up only living in the end during their visualization sessions. And the other 23 hours of the day are just being the version of themselves who's waiting and hoping. In this video, I'm going to share the exact methodology I use with my clients, I use personally, and I teach my clients to actually live in the end all day long. Not as a technique you do for 20 minutes, but as a way of being you can actually maintain consistently. And I'll share a client story with you as well, one of my clients that shows what becomes possible when you actually master this. And it's not a difficult thing to master at all. If you're new here, hello, I am your Muse Traci. On this channel, I help you unlock the power you already have but can't access. I help you break through where years of trying has failed. And the biggest hurdle of all, I help you go from intellectually knowing the law to permanently embodying it, using the information to help you in your life. That's what we're all about here. We need to learn how to apply it, not just know fun, kind of cool stuff, right? So let's get clear on what living in the end actually means, because there's a lot of confusion about this. As I've already said, living in the end is not just visualizing for 20 minutes a day. It's not just affirming. It's not just doing your sats at night. Living in the end means you occupy the consciousness of the version of you who already has what you want all the time, not just when you're performing techniques. And since this isn't your norm, right? What are you used to living in? You're used to living in, what do I see around me? And this is so automatic that we need a way to break this, right? Because your automatic go to living in the end of, what do I see? So we need an actual thing to employ in order to let you live in the end of your desire that maybe you don't see yet in your physical reality. Living in the end means you occupy the consciousness of the version of you who already has what you want all the time. Again, not when you're just performing techniques. You think the thoughts that version would think. You feel the feelings that version would feel. You make the choices that version would make. You move through your day the way that version would move through their day. Neville said it this way. He said, your assumption hardens into fact when you persist in it. And persisting in it doesn't mean doing it harder for shorter periods of time. It means consistently being in that state or in that assumption throughout your day, throughout your life. And that's where most people get stuck. They think living in the end is a practice they do, but it's actually a state you occupy continuously until, how long should you do it? Well, until your reality catches up with you, right? That's how long you do it. You don't do it until your belief runs out, until your willpower runs out because you still hold an old belief system that you're trying to white knuckle through. No, you just do it for forever until reality catches up. Then it'll happen effortlessly. But until that happens, you do it intentionally because you know how this works. Okay, so now that we know how long to do it, how do you actually do this in your day-to-day life? Here's the exact methodology I teach my clients, and it's deceptively simple, but when you actually apply it, it changes everything. So the exact methodology is you go through your day observing your thoughts. All of them, every single one. You just be the observer, okay, throughout the day. And as you observe each thought, you ask one question. Is this thought a thought I would have from my end? Is this thought a thought the version of me who already has my desire would be thinking? So you observe and you ask. Now, if the answer is yes, great. You are living in the end. Carry on. The thought is consistent with the version of you who already has your desire. Now, if the answer is no, You simply adjust the thought. You transform that thought to be from your end. So ask yourself the question, okay, that's not from my end. So from my end, what would that thought look like? And you shift it to a thought your end version would actually be thinking on the same subject, not by forcing positive thinking, not by suppressing what you're thinking, right? We're not trying to cover this up with, everything's always working out for me. I get everything that I want. That's not the process. That's not how you do this. But it's by genuinely asking, what would the version of me who already has this be thinking right now in this moment? And then think that thought instead. You replace it with that thought. Not covering up with vague statements like I just said, everything is always working out for me. I get everything I want. No, it's directly changing the thought to be the same thought, but what it would look like from your end if you were now the version of you who had your desired reality right now. This works because most of what keeps you out of the end is unconscious. You probably, most likely, are having thoughts all day that match the version of you who doesn't have your desire yet, and you don't even realize it. The thoughts feel normal. They feel like they feel like, oh, I'm just observing reality. Yeah, you are, but that's not the right end. You have to think from already having your desire. So they feel like you and they go unchallenged. But when you start observing them and questioning them, you start catching them. You start making them conscious. And every time you catch one and upgrade it, you're literally living in the end in that moment. You're shifting your consciousness to the version that already has it now. Do this enough times throughout the day and you've created a sustained state of living in the end, not for just 20 minutes, but for hours, right? For a full day. And eventually it becomes your default way of being. Let me give you some examples so you can see how this practically works. You're getting ready for work and you think, I hope my SP texts me today. And you observe that thought and you ask, is this from my end? Of course, the answer is no. The version of you who already has the relationship in your life wouldn't be hoping for a text. She'd already know you're always communicating regularly. It's the most natural thing in the world to communicate naturally and effortlessly. You have wonderful flowing communication. So you upgrade. And it sounds something like, I'm so grateful for this relationship and our effortless communication every single day. Done. You just lived in the end in that moment. Let's say you're at lunch and you think, why is money always so tight for me? You observe the thought and you ask, is this from my end? And of course, the answer is no. The version of me with financial freedom wouldn't be thinking that. So you upgrade. Money flows to me with ease and in abundance. I always have more than enough. Done. You're living in the end. You see something on social media and you think, that's never going to happen for me. And you observe and ask, is that a thought I would have from my end? No. That is not from my end. The version of me who has what I want would see other people's success as proof of what's possible for me too. So you upgrade. That is just proof of what's also possible for me and what I already have in my reality. They are my creation, so of course that is also available for me. You go through your day like this all day, every day, catching the thoughts that aren't from your end, adjusting them, and then just continuing on with your day. No shame, no judgment, no self-condemnation for, not doing better. None of that is necessary and none of that is helpful. It's not about being perfect. You will have thoughts that aren't from your end. That's normal. Again, what have you been practicing your whole life? You live from the end of 3D reality, right? So we're trying to change that. It takes practice to change that. And we have to be deliberate and conscious about changing that, right? So you don't need to shame or blame yourself. That's not helpful. Why are you doing that? Stop doing that. It's working against yourself, actually, right? So just recognize the thought, have a lighthearted, playful attitude, do what you need to do, and carry on. You are literally rewiring decades of programming. So the point isn't to be perfect. The point is to catch it. You don't let them just run unchecked. You actively upgrade them every single time you notice the thoughts are not from your end. And as you do this consistently, something starts to happen. The thoughts from your end start to become natural. You don't have to upgrade as often because you're naturally thinking from that version more of the time. The end, thinking from the end, starts to become your default. And that's when manifestation gets effortless, because you're not visiting the end for just 20 minutes out of your day. You are living there. That's why Neville called it living from the end. So let me share a story about one of my clients because she really embodied this methodology and her results were incredible. So she came to me wanting to manifest a complete life transformation. It wasn't just one area. It wasn't just an SP. Yes, she wanted her specific person. She wanted a better career situation. She wanted to feel happy in her physical appearance again and happy in her body. And she'd been doing all the manifestation techniques for over a year, I think, and she still felt stuck. And when we started working together, I noticed something. She knew all the techniques. She could explain the law of assumption perfectly. She was visualizing every night. But when I asked her what her thoughts were like throughout the day, she started to realize she was barely living in the end at all. She was just kind of living in the end of her 3D reality, which I've been explaining in this video is normal. Okay, that's what you've done your entire life. So it's going to take a little bit of conscious practice and this methodology that I'm sharing with you. It's going to take you putting this method into practice to change this. Most of her thoughts were about her current circumstances, about what wasn't working, what was still missing, about what she was waiting for, about her SP and whether he was thinking of her, and about money and whether she'd have enough, wondering what she was doing wrong and how much more she needed to affirm or visualize. Or maybe this wasn't working at all. Maybe none of this was actually real. Sounds familiar, right? We all go through this, okay? But hours of those kinds of thoughts every day, and then maybe 20 minutes of visualizing at the end of the day. So the math wasn't working in her favor, as you can see. So we worked together and I taught her this exact methodology: observe and ask, is this from my end? And if not, you simply transform it. She started doing this, and a little reluctantly at first, because she said it felt weird. She'd catch herself in some old thought pattern and have to consciously upgrade it over and over throughout the day. At first it can be clunky. It's normal. It's to be expected. So I just encouraged her to be easy with herself, to keep going. It was going to get easier. And in the first week, she said she was exhausted by how often she had to do it. There were so many thoughts that weren't from her end. She had no idea until she started doing this practice. But she stuck with it. She kept observing. She kept asking. She kept upgrading when she needed to. And by week 2, she said the upgrades were happening more automatically. So less effort. She'd catch a thought and shift to it without feeling, like she was really kind of struggling to do this. And by week 3, she was noticing more thoughts that naturally came from her end without her having to adjust them at all. She was thinking from the version of her who had what she wanted by default. And more moments of the day, just kind of automatically coming up in her mind. And then the 3D started to move. Her SP reached out of nowhere, not out of nowhere. It's all coming out of her consciousness, right? But you know what I mean by out of nowhere. A career opportunity appeared that she hadn't been looking for. Her whole energy shifted and the people around her started, showing up in accordance with this new end that she was internally living from. And she told me later that the methodology changed everything for her. And not because she did anything dramatic, but because she finally understood that living in the end was an all-day practice, not a 20-minute exercise. It's, again, living in the end, not thinking from the end for 20 minutes. Neville literally called it living from the end for this reason. And when she actually lived it, her reality had no choice but to catch up. I would say, I like to say no choice to do what it's always doing. Follow her. It's always following her. Your reality is always following you. This is what's available when you actually live in the end, not visit it, but you live there. And I want to drive this home even further because it's that important. Living in the end is the whole game. Everything else, the techniques, the affirmations, the visualizations, SATs, scripting, I could go on and on and on. All of it. If I missed any here, include that too. All of them are in the service of one thing, getting you to the state of the wish fulfilled, living in the end. If you can live in the end, you don't need the techniques. The techniques are just tools to help you get into the state of the wish fulfilled. The techniques are just tools so you can get there. But once you occupy that state on your own throughout the day, you don't even need the techniques to get you into the state. You're already there and you've been living there. There's nothing left to do. The 3D has to catch up. This is why I focus so much on this with my clients, because techniques without state changes are exhausting and basically ineffective. State changes without techniques equals effortless manifestation, which is what I'm all about and what I teach my clients and what they learn to do. Which, if you think about it, that's exactly what you're doing when you're manifesting unconsciously. You're always creating everything all the time. You're either doing it consciously or unconsciously. But when you're doing it unconsciously, it's because you're living in that end. You're always living in some end. And the methodology I just shared is how you do it consciously, how you get in the end that you actually want to live in your physical 3D reality, not as a one-time thing, as a continuous practice that becomes your very way of being, your actual way of being. So to recap, observe your thoughts, ask if they're from your end, adjust the ones that aren't, and keep it moving. That's it. That's the whole process. It's not complicated. You just have to be diligent and consistent in observing and upgrading whenever necessary. It sounds simple because it is, but when you actually do it consistently, it transforms your entire reality because you're no longer being the version of you who's waiting, right? Waiting gets more waiting for what you want and living in the end of not having. You're being the version who already has it, and the universe has no choice but to deliver the matching experience. That's what it's always doing. If you've been struggling to live in the end, this is the methodology that will actually get you there. Observe your thoughts throughout the day. All of them. Ask the question, is this from my end? Is this what the version of me who already has my desire would be thinking? Again, if it is, carry on, thumbs up, you're living in the end. If not, you simply shift the thought. Do this consistently and you'll find that you're no longer just visualizing, you're living from that end. And that's when the 3D has to match. If you want my help making this methodology your default way of being, identifying the deeper programming that keeps pulling you out of the end and creating permanent changes in your programming so that living in the end becomes effortless, I'd love to work with you. That is the work I love to do with my clients. You can click the link down in the description and in the pinned comment where you can book a free one-on-one call with me to see if we're a good fit to work together. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next one.